You're 26 years old, playing norteño music in cantinas across Sinaloa for tips and whatever the owner feels like paying. You learned accordion from your grandfather, guitar from your father, singing from the radio stations that drifted through the hills where you grew up. Music was never supposed to be a career. It was just what your family did, the way some families farm and others build. But you're good at it. Better than good. People stop talking when you play. People remember songs they heard you sing once, years later, in places far from where they heard them. A man approaches you after a show in Culiacan. He's polite, well-dressed, the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He says he represents people who appreciate your talent. People who'd like you to write something for them. A corrido, a story song, the kind of narco corrido that celebrates the lives of men who live outside the law. They'll pay more for one song than you make in a year of cantina shows. They'll make sure the song gets heard. You know what he's asking. Narco corridos are controversial. Banned from some radio stations, blamed for glorifying violence, connected to organizations that don't appreciate being refused. But they're also tradition, stretching back generations, telling stories that official history ignores. Your grandfather sang corridos about revolutionaries. Your father sang corridos about smugglers. The line between folk music and cartel propaganda is blurry, and you've been walking it your whole life without ever having to choose a side. The man slides an envelope across the table. Inside is more cash than you've ever seen. 50,000 pesos, just for listening to the pitch. He tells you the name of the man they want immortalized. A regional boss, recently killed, beloved by his people, feared by his enemies. They want his story told the way corridos tell stories, as legend, as myth, as something that will outlive the headlines and the body count. You take the money. You write the song. You tell yourself it's just music. The corrido is called El Halcón de la Sierra, the Hawk of the Mountains. You write it in 3 days, pouring everything you know about melody and storytelling into verses that describe a man you never met. His humble origins, his rise to power, his generosity to the poor, his bravery against enemies, his death framed as martyrdom, as sacrifice, as the price of living boldly in a world that punishes boldness. You don't mention the murders. You don't mention the drugs. You mention loyalty and honor and the Sierra that raised him. They love it. The organization loves it so much, they arrange a recording session. Professional studio, real musicians, production quality that makes your cantina recording sound like tin cans and string. They distribute the song through channels you don't understand, and within weeks it's everywhere. Radio stations that would never play it officially somehow play it constantly. It spreads through social media, through markets, through the trucks and cars of men who see themselves in the lyrics. You become famous. Not famous like pop stars with their billboards and television appearances, famous in a specific world, among specific people. The cartel world, where your song is played at parties and funerals, and the quiet moments when men think about their own mortality. Truck drivers blast it through their speakers. Kids sing along without understanding what the words mean. Bars in Culiacan and Mazatlan and Tijuana play it on repeat. You've created something that's become part of the culture. A 4-minute mythology that people will remember long after the man it celebrates is forgotten. You're invited to perform at events you can't refuse. Celebrations where the guests carry weapons openly, and the host has killed more people than you've ever met. Quinceañeras for daughters of lieutenants. Weddings where the groom is a regional boss. Funerals where the deceased died violently and will be remembered as a hero. You sing your songs, and they sing along. Voices rising in unison, and for those 4 minutes, you're the most important person in the room. The most dangerous men in Sinaloa go quiet when you play. They listen like children hearing bedtime stories. They applaud like you've given them something sacred. Year 1. They commission more songs. Every regional boss wants his own corrido, his own mythology, his own 4 minutes of immortality that will outlast his body and his crimes. You write about men who traffic cocaine across borders and call it business, who've built empires on powder and suffering and call it success. You write about men who kill rivals in daylight and call it justice, who eliminate entire families and call it necessity. You write about women who've lost husbands and sons to the violence and call it destiny, who wear black forever and call it love. You become the poet laureate of an organization that deals in death, and every song earns you more money than your father made in his lifetime of honest work. You buy your parents a new house. You send your siblings to better schools. You do what musicians dream of doing. You support your family with your art. The art just happens to glorify murder. Your family doesn't know what to think. Your mother lights candles and prays for your soul. Your father, who sang corridos about smugglers himself, understands but doesn't approve. Your younger brother thinks you're a hero, plays your songs constantly, talks about following in your footsteps. You try to discourage him. You try to explain that the footsteps lead somewhere he doesn't want to go. He doesn't listen. Why would he? You're successful. You're respected. You're everything he wants to be. The requests become more specific. A boss wants a corrido that names his enemies, that mocks their deaths, that celebrates their suffering. You write it because refusing isn't an option you have anymore. The song circulates through the same channels as your others, and within a month, the men named in the lyrics are dead. Not because of your song. They were already marked. But the song becomes the soundtrack to their deaths, played at celebrations you don't want to imagine. You realize you've become a weapon. Not a gun, not a blade, but something more insidious. A voice that shapes how violence is remembered, that turns murders into myths, that gives meaning to meaninglessness. The corridos you write don't pull triggers, but they create the culture that makes pulling triggers feel heroic. You're complicit in a way that's impossible to measure, but impossible to deny. Year 2. A journalist writes an article about narco corrido singers, and you're featured prominently. She describes you as talented but troubled, an artist caught between tradition and exploitation. She asks if you feel responsible for glorifying violence. You give an answer that sounds thoughtful but means nothing. Something about art reflecting reality, about corridos being a mirror rather than a cause. The answer satisfies no one, least of all yourself. The article brings attention you don't want. Legitimate music producers reach out, offering deals that would take you away from the cartel world. Record labels in Mexico City, opportunities in Los Angeles, the chance to become something other than what you've become. You consider them seriously. You imagine a life where your songs are about love and loss and the ordinary struggles of ordinary people. Then you receive a visit. Not threatening. The organization doesn't need to threaten you directly. Just a reminder of obligations, of relationships, of the understanding that your success came from somewhere, and that somewhere expects loyalty. They've invested in you, they explain. They've made you what you are. Walking away would be ungrateful. Walking away would be remembered. You decline the legitimate offers. You tell yourself it's because the money isn't as good, which is true. You tell yourself it's because you'd miss the music you make, which is also true. You don't tell yourself the real reason. You're afraid. Afraid of what happens to singers who leave. Afraid of becoming another story in someone else's corrido. Year 3. You meet a woman at one of the events you can't refuse. She's beautiful and smart and has nothing to do with the organization. She's there as someone's cousin, dragged along to a party she didn't want to attend. You talk for hours about music and family and the village where you grew up. She doesn't care about your fame or your money. She cares about the person underneath, the one you've been losing track of. Her name is Elena. You fall in love with her the way people fall in love in corridos, completely, recklessly, in defiance of everything sensible. She falls in love with you too, or with the version of you she sees, the musician who plays traditional songs at family gatherings, the man who talks about his grandfather's accordion with tears in his eyes. She doesn't fully understand what your career involves. You don't fully explain. You get married in year 4. Small ceremony, family only, in the village where your grandfather taught you to play. The church is 200 years old, the same church where your parents married, where your grandparents married, where generations of your family have marked the important moments of their lives. Elena wears white. Your mother cries. Your father plays guitar. Not your corridos, but the old songs. The ones about love and longing and the beauty of the Sierra. For one day, you feel like the person you were before the man in Culiacan changed everything. For one day, the corridos are just songs, and the money is just money, and the future is something you might actually control. Your wedding night, you lie awake while Elena sleeps, and you think about the two paths your life has taken. The path that led to this woman, this village, this sense of belonging to something good. And the path that led to the corridos, the commissions, the organization that owns your voice. The paths don't run parallel. They intersect constantly, contaminating each other, and you don't know how to keep them separate. Then you go back to work, because the work never stops, because the commissions keep coming, because the organization that made you famous expects you to keep making them proud. You write corridos about new bosses and new victories and new enemies who've been eliminated. You perform at events that Elena can't attend because the danger is too real, because the guests might recognize your wife and remember her face, because the world of corridos is no place for someone innocent. You become two people. The husband who comes home to a quiet house and plays with the dog and talks about ordinary things, and the singer who glorifies violence for men who commit it without hesitation. Elena gets pregnant in year 5. A son, the doctors say. You think about your father, about your grandfather, about the generations of musicians who came before you. You think about what you'll teach him, what songs you'll pass down, what legacy you'll leave. You don't want him to learn the songs you've been writing. You don't want him to know this version of his father. You start planning an exit. Carefully, slowly, the way people plan exits from things that don't allow exits. You save money in accounts the organization doesn't know about. You build relationships with people outside the cartel world, connections that might help you start over. You write fewer commissioned corridos, citing fatigue, citing family obligations, hoping they'll slowly forget about you. They don't forget. A visit comes in year 6. The same polite tone, the same unspoken threats. They've noticed you pulling back. They're concerned. They want to make sure everything is okay, that you're still committed, that the relationship remains strong. The visit ends with a commission you can't refuse, a corrido for the new regional boss, the one who replaced the man from your first song, the cycle continuing. You write the song. You record it in the same professional studio where your career began. You perform it at an event where the new boss sits in the front row, watching you sing his mythology into existence. He thanks you afterward, calls you a treasure, says your voice is the sound of Sinaloa itself. You smile. You shake his hand. You go home to Elena and your son, and you don't sleep. Year 7. Your brother calls from Culiacan. He's followed your footsteps after all. Started writing his own corridos, caught the attention of people who appreciate his talent. He's excited. He's proud. He wants your advice on how to navigate the world you've navigated. You tell him to stop. You tell him to find another path. You tell him everything you've never told anyone about what this life costs. He doesn't listen. Of course he doesn't. You didn't listen either when you were young and hungry and convinced that talent would protect you. Your brother writes his corridos. He catches the attention you caught. He begins the journey that led you here, to a house you can't leave, and a career you can't quit, and a family you're terrified of losing. A rival organization decides to send a message in year 8, not to you directly, to the organization that sponsors you. They kill a singer, someone like you, someone whose corrido celebrated the wrong people. They leave the body in public, make sure the message is clear. Singing for cartels has consequences. Glory is temporary. Everyone is vulnerable. You receive a security detail after that. Men who follow you to performances, who sit outside your house at night, who remind you constantly that you're valuable enough to protect, and therefore valuable enough to target. Elena is terrified. She wants to leave, to take your son somewhere far from Sinaloa, somewhere the corridos don't reach. You want that too. You just don't know how to get there. Year 9. Your grandfather's accordion sits in the corner of your living room. You haven't played it in months. It feels wrong to touch it with hands that have written what you've written. Your son is 4 now, old enough to be curious about music, old enough to ask why Daddy's guitar stays in its case. You tell him you're taking a break. You don't tell him that every note reminds you of what you've become. The organization asks for another corrido. A major one. The Oyabun himself, the man at the top, wants his story told. Not because he's dying, but because he wants to control the narrative while he's alive. He wants a mythology that shapes how people see him, that outlasts whatever fate has planned. He wants you to write it. You write it. What else can you do? You pour everything into the song, all your skill, all your craft, all the storytelling techniques your grandfather taught you. You create a masterpiece about a man who has murdered hundreds, who has destroyed communities, who has built an empire on suffering. You make him sound like a hero. You make him sound like a legend. The song is released. The song is loved. The song cements your position as the greatest narco corrido singer of your generation. You're famous. You're protected. You're trapped. Your son learns to walk. He learns to talk. He learns to sing along with songs on the radio, simple melodies about sunshine and animals, and the innocent things children should sing about. You watch him and wonder what he'll think someday, when he's old enough to hear the songs his father wrote, when he understands what the words really mean. You were supposed to be a folk musician. You were supposed to carry your grandfather's accordion into the future, to pass down songs that told stories worth telling. Stories about love and struggle and the beauty of the land where your family has lived for generations. Instead, you became a voice for violence, a poet for killers, a legend maker for men who don't deserve legends. The music was never supposed to be this. Your grandfather never imagined this. The music became this anyway. You became this anyway. And every time you open your mouth to sing, you become it too. Every melody, every verse, every perfect note carries the weight of what you've chosen. The accordion sits in the corner, silent, waiting. Maybe someday you'll play it again. Maybe someday you'll remember how. But not today. Today there's another corrido to write. There's always another corrido to write. That's a wrap. The story is fiction, but narco corrido singers are real. Right now, in studios across Mexico, artists are writing songs that glorify violence for organizations, that commission mythology the way corporations commission advertisements. The music is beautiful. The music is tradition. The music is also propaganda. If this made you think, drop a comment. Subscribe for more.